The knock on my apartment door came at 6 a.m., and it was not my landlord. It was a courier holding a wooden crate the size of a microwave, and behind him, parked illegally across 2 spots, sat a car with a driver who did not look like he was used to waiting outside buildings without doormen. I signed for the crate because my brain had not caught up with my hands yet. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a hand-forged carbon steel knife, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent, the kind I had once mentioned wanting during a 15-second aside in a meeting 11 days earlier. A card sat on top. It said, "You should be cutting with something that matches your skill. Come find me when you're ready to talk." No signature, just an initial, V. My phone buzzed before I had even closed the door. Then it buzzed again. Then a third time, in a rhythm that told me this was not going to be a normal Tuesday. By the time I got to the restaurant group's test kitchen at 7, there were 2 more packages waiting at the security desk, and the woman at the front didn't even ask my name anymore. She just slid them across the counter with an expression that said she had questions she'd been told not to ask. The second package was a small robotic mixing arm, still in a prototype casing, with a sticky note that read, "Built this so you never have to whisk by hand again. You're welcome, N." The third was a tin of saffron so dark red it looked black, sourced, according to the accompanying note, from a farm that supplied exactly 1 hotel group in the world. The card read, in handwriting so elegant it looked printed, "This is the blend your grandmother used. I had someone find it." I stood in the loading dock holding a knife, a robot arm, and rare saffron, and I understood, with the particular horror of someone watching a small mistake become a large one in real time, exactly what had happened. I had sent the wrong voice memo to the wrong group chat. My name is Maya Reyes. I am 26 years old, and until that Tuesday, my job title was Culinary Operations Lead for Harvest Row, a project that did not officially exist yet, outside of pitch decks and a single unfinished pop-up kitchen in a converted shipping container. I had built the menu, trained the staff, negotiated with produce suppliers who did not want to work with anyone under 40, and done all of this while technically reporting to a man named Julian Ferro, executive chef director of the Ferro Restaurant Group, who liked to remind me that I was still building my resume. Harvest Row was not my idea, not exactly. It was the joint project of 3 women who had, 6 months earlier, decided that instead of competing for the same luxury market, they would put money into something that actually fed people. Vivian Cole ran Cole Maritime, a logistics and shipping empire so large that when dock workers in 4 countries went on strike, business news channels called her before they called their own reporters. Nadia Okoye had built and sold 2 robotics companies before she turned 30, and now ran a foundation that funded what she called unreasonable engineering, which was how the mixing arm had come to exist a full year before any commercial kitchen would have one. And Rosalind Marchetti controlled Marchetti Hospitality, a name attached to hotels in 19 countries, the kind of woman whose smile in a press photo could move a stock price. Together they had funded Harvest Row, mobile kitchens that could set up in underserved neighborhoods within 6 hours, staffed and trained locally, selling real meals at real prices instead of running as a charity that quietly went bankrupt in 18 months. It needed someone to run the actual food operation across all 3 investors' competing visions of what it should be. Vivian wanted efficiency and supply chain discipline. Nadia wanted every kitchen automated within a year. Rosalind wanted it beautiful enough that donors would want their names on it. Somebody had to sit between all 3 of them and keep the food from becoming a battlefield. That somebody was me, because I had raised my hand in a meeting when nobody else would. For 4 months, my relationship with all 3 women had been entirely professional, if occasionally exhausting. Vivian corrected my supply projections with the patience of someone who considered patience a professional obligation rather than a virtue. Nadia showed up unannounced to test new kitchen equipment on my staff and treated every failed prototype as personal entertainment. Rosalind sat through my menu tastings with a stillness that made me nervous until the day she told me, quietly, that the lentil stew reminded her of a kitchen she hadn't stood in since she was 9 years old, before her family had money, before any of this. Somewhere in those 4 months, without deciding to, I had started noticing things. The way Vivian rerouted a delayed shipment of specialty rice through a personal contact at 2 a.m. without ever mentioning it, so that I found out only when the truck arrived early. The way Nadia asked my opinion on things she clearly already had strong opinions about, just to hear what I'd say. The way Rosalind remembered, 3 weeks after a single offhand comment, that I preferred my coffee with cardamom instead of cinnamon. I told myself this was just what it felt like to be taken seriously by powerful people for the first time in my career. I did not let myself examine it any further than that, because examining it further felt dangerous, and because I had a cousin, Danny, 3 states away, who had spent our entire lives being the person I told things to at 1 a.m. when my thoughts got too loud to keep in. So 2 nights before the knife, the robot arm, and the saffron arrived, I had done what I always did. I opened a voice memo at 12:40 in the morning and talked until the feeling made sense. I said that I thought I might be falling for someone I worked with. I said it was complicated because it wasn't really one someone, it was 3, and I knew how that sounded, and I wasn't asking Danny to understand it. I just needed to say the words outside my own head before they ate me alive. I said I loved watching a person notice a problem before I did and quietly solve it without asking for credit. I said I loved being teased by someone who clearly wanted my attention and didn't know how to ask for it directly. I said I loved being remembered, specifically, in small details, by someone who remembered almost nothing about anyone else. I said all 3 of those things were true about all 3 of my investors, and that this made me either the luckiest woman in the city or the most delusional, and I hadn't decided which yet. Then I sent it. Except 3 days earlier, during a scheduling nightmare, I had created a single group chat containing Vivian, Nadia, Rosalind, and myself to coordinate a joint site visit. My phone, apparently, had learned to auto-complete that chat's name faster than it auto-completed my cousin's, because when I searched D for Danny, the group chat beginning with Harvest Row, had shoved itself to the top of the list, and my thumb, moving faster than my judgment, had selected it without a second look. I found out my mistake, the way you find out a building is on fire, from the smell before you see the flames. 3 read receipts appeared under the memo within 4 minutes of each other. Not one message came back that night. Just silence, thick and specific, from 3 of the most powerful women in the country, all of whom now knew, in my own voice, exactly how I felt, and none of whom knew which one of them I meant. I hadn't decided that myself. That was the problem. By the time the gifts started arriving 2 days later, it was clear each of them had privately concluded the confession was about her, and had also privately concluded that the correct response to romantic uncertainty was overwhelming, competitive generosity. I texted Danny a single line. I think I just accidentally proposed to my 3 bosses. She called me back within 30 seconds. Explain. Now. I explained. There was a very long silence on the other end of the line, the kind Danny only produced when she was either extremely impressed or extremely worried, and with Danny, those 2 states looked almost identical. Okay, she finally said. First, are any of them actually your boss, legally, in an HR sense? They're the funders. I technically report to Julian. Second, do you like them? I didn't answer fast enough, and she laughed, not unkindly. That's what I thought, she said. Third, and most importantly, did you say which one you meant? I don't know which one I meant. Danny exhaled slowly. Maya, you cannot show up to work today. I showed up to work that morning anyway, because Harvest Row had its first full-scale demonstration kitchen event in 6 days. A live public tasting meant to convince the city council to approve permits for 4 permanent locations, and there was no version of my life in which I let a badly aimed voice memo cost 40 jobs that hadn't been created yet. I should have known the universe was not going to let me handle this quietly, because the first person I saw when I walked into the test kitchen was Julian Farrow, standing by the walk-in cooler with his arms crossed and an expression that told me he had already heard. My office, he said. Now. Julian's office was a glass box on the mezzanine level, positioned so he could watch the kitchen floor at all times, which he treated less as a design choice and more as a personality trait. He didn't offer me a seat. There's a rumor, he said, that you sent a personal message to all 3 Harvest Row investors describing romantic feelings for them, simultaneously. It was a mistake. It was meant for my cousin. That's not actually better, Maya. It's not a crime to have feelings, Julian. No, he said. But it is a serious problem when the feelings belong to the 3 women funding a project you don't officially control, and when those same 3 women have spent 4 months treating you like the only person in this building whose judgment they trust. Do you understand what that looks like from the outside? It looks like you engineered this. I didn't engineer anything. I made a mistake with a group chat. Perception doesn't care about your intentions. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed in the mirror. I'm removing you from lead position on the demonstration event. I'll run point personally. You'll assist. I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. I built that menu from nothing. I trained every person on that floor. And I'm protecting you from a mess you created. You're protecting yourself from a headline. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it, which told me everything. I walked out of that glass box angrier than I had been in years, and the anger was still sitting in my chest, unresolved, when I turned the corner toward the loading dock and found all 3 of them standing there, together, which had never once happened without a scheduled meeting and a conference table between them. Vivian stood a half step ahead of the other 2, dressed like she had come from a boardroom instead of a kitchen, arms folded, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Nadia sat cross-legged on a stack of crates, scrolling through something on her phone with the specific energy of a person who had been asked to wait and was doing an extremely poor job of it. Rosalind stood slightly apart from both of them, one gloved hand resting against the doorframe, composed in the particular way that meant she had decided, deliberately, not to show whatever she was actually feeling. You received our messages, Vivian said. It wasn't a question. I received gifts I never asked for and can't accept, I said. And I think all 3 of you need to understand that the voice memo was a mistake. It was never supposed to reach any of you. That's not what it said, Nadia said, not looking up from her phone. You said 3 people. You said all 3 things were true about all 3 of us. That's not exactly an accident, Maya. That's a very specific, very detailed accident. I meant it, I said. I just never meant to say it out loud. To any of you. At all. Rosalind's gloved hand tightened slightly on the doorframe. Then which one of us did you mean, Maya? The honest answer sat in my throat, heavy and true and completely useless. I don't know. Nobody in that loading dock had prepared for that answer. Vivian's composure flickered, just barely, at the corners. Nadia finally looked up from her phone, something unguarded crossing her face, before she caught it and smoothed it away. Rosalind said nothing at all, which from her was its own kind of answer. "I need all three of you to understand something," I said, "because if I didn't say it now, I never would. I have a demonstration event in 6 days that Julian just took away from me because he thinks I engineered a scandal to manipulate my way into a promotion. I don't have room right now to figure out my feelings while also fighting for my job. So whatever this is, it has to wait." Vivian recovered first, the way she always did. "Julian removed you from lead position? Effective this morning. On what grounds? Perception." Something shifted behind Vivian's eyes, cold and precise, like a ledger closing. "I see." I put a hand up before she could say anything else. "I need you not to fix this for me, any of you. If you make a call, if you threaten his funding, if you do anything to put me back in that position by force, it will prove exactly what he's accusing me of. I need to win this on the food, not on any of you." For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Rosalind inclined her head, barely. "Understood." "Fine," Vivian said, though the word cost her something. Nadia raised both hands. "I promise not to hack his calendar. Nadia. I said I promise." I left the loading dock that morning with 3 unresolved confessions hanging over me, a job I no longer officially led, and 6 days to prove that the thing Julian was calling a scandal was actually the best work I had ever done. The next 5 days were the hardest and strangest of my career. Julian kept me technically employed on the project, but stripped of authority, which meant I spent most of my time watching him make decisions I knew were wrong, and biting my tongue because objecting too loudly would confirm his theory that I was trying to seize control through influence rather than competence. He simplified the menu I had spent 4 months developing, cutting the dishes that required the most skill, because he didn't trust the newer staff to execute them under pressure, replacing them with safer, blander plates that would photograph fine and taste like nothing. He moved the tasting stations further from the produce displays, which killed the whole visual story I had built about where the ingredients came from and who grew them. Vivian noticed the shipment changes first because Julian had quietly rerouted 2 of my specialty ingredient orders to save cost, and the new supplier's rice arrived a full grade lower than what I had specified. She didn't call me about it. She sent me a single message. "Your original supplier has been reinstated. I paid the difference personally, from an account with no connection to Harvest Row's official funding, so it cannot be traced back as investor interference. This was a private decision about food quality, not about you." I read that message 4 times before I let myself believe she had actually drawn that line on purpose, carefully, so that helping me wouldn't become another weapon in Julian's argument. Nadia showed up on day 3 with a modified version of her mixing arm, quieter now, recalibrated for the exact recipes I had written before Julian cut them from the menu, and left it in my locker with a note that said, "In case you need backup equipment nobody approved yet. Purely coincidental." I didn't ask how she knew my locker combination. I decided some questions were better left unasked. Rosalind sent nothing at all, which worried me more than gifts would have, until day 4, when she appeared in the test kitchen after hours, still in the cream-colored suit she'd worn to a hotel opening across the city, and asked, quietly, if she could taste something. "The stew," she said, "the one you told me about, the one that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. Julian cut it from the menu." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm asking you to make it for me anyway, tonight, just once, not for the event, for me." I made it for her, in an empty kitchen at 9 at night, and she sat on an overturned crate in a suit worth more than my car and ate it slowly, without speaking, until she set the spoon down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her before, something unguarded and much younger than the rest of her ever-let show. "This belongs on that menu," she said, Whatever it costs me to make that happen, without breaking your rule, I will find a way that doesn't involve my name." 2 days before the event, the answer to how she'd do it walked in the form of a city council aide who had, entirely independently, tasted a version of the same stew at a community kitchen Rosalind quietly funded years earlier, long before Harvest Row existed, and mentioned to the council chair that dishes with real community history tended to perform far better in public funding hearings than anything designed by committee. I did. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep, so I sat on my apartment floor with my laptop and rewrote the entire presentation from scratch, restoring every dish Julian had cut, rebuilding the ingredient story, staying up until 4 in the morning because some part of me had decided that if I was going down for this, I would go down having actually fought for the work, instead of quietly accepting a smaller version of it. The morning of the demonstration, Julian discovered the changes 20 minutes before doors opened and nearly had a stroke in front of the produce table. You cannot unilaterally rewrite the presentation the morning of the event. I can, if the version I'm rewriting was never approved by anyone except you, and you removed me from lead position without a formal review, which means legally, I still hold authorship rights over the original menu design under my contract. Check Clause 11. I had, in fact, spent an hour the previous week reading my own contract for exactly this reason. A small, cold decision that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with refusing to disappear quietly. Julian's face went through several colors. If this fails, it is entirely on you. It already was, I said, and walked past him to the tasting stations. The demonstration should have been a triumph. For the first 90 minutes, it was. The council members tasted dishes built around ingredients sourced from the same neighborhoods the kitchens would eventually serve, heard the stories behind each one, watched trained local staff move with the confidence of people who had actually been taught the food instead of handed a script. Then, at 1:15 in the afternoon, one of the temporary propane lines feeding the outdoor grill station developed a slow leak that nobody noticed until a spark from a nearby sauté station caught it, and a wall of flame went up along the length of the demonstration tent, hard enough to send the crowd screaming backward into the produce displays. For the next 11 minutes, everything I knew about kitchens, and nothing I knew about romance, was the only thing that mattered. I got the staff moving the propane tanks away from the flame line before anyone thought to call for help. Vivian, standing near the entrance for the presentation, had emergency services on the phone within seconds and personally directed the crowd toward the widest exit, using a calm, carrying voice that cut through the panic like a blade. Nadia, 3 tables away testing a prototype ventilation unit, rerouted its airflow system in real time to pull smoke away from the crowd instead of into it, something no fire code required and no manual explained, invented entirely in the moment because she understood the machine better than anyone alive. Rosalind, closest to the council members, moved 4 elderly guests bodily away from the heat and stayed between them and the fire until the last one was clear, her cream suit ruined with soot, her composure never once slipping in front of the people who needed her steady. The fire department had the flames out in under 6 minutes. Nobody was seriously hurt. 2 staff members had minor burns treated on site. The council chair, coughing smoke out of her lungs at the edge of the parking lot, looked at me and said the sentence that ended up in every headline that evening. If your team handles a live fire with that much composure, I have no concerns about how you'll handle 4 kitchens. Julian tried to give the recovery statement to the press himself. I walked up beside him before he finished the second sentence and said, calmly, in front of 3 cameras, that I would be handling questions about the incident myself, since I had been the one running food operations at the time. He didn't argue with me in front of the cameras. He couldn't, without confirming exactly the story he'd spent a week trying to prevent. I answered every question honestly. Yes, there had been an accident. No, it hadn't been caused by negligence, and the fire marshal's preliminary report would confirm that within the week. Yes, I had personal relationships with the project's 3 investors that had recently become a subject of public speculation. No, those relationships had not influenced any operational decision made that day, and anyone questioning that could review the fact that I had spent the previous 5 days stripped of lead authority by my own director over exactly that concern. That last part I hadn't planned to say. It came out anyway, and I watched Julian's face go rigid beside me as 3 separate reporters turned toward him with new questions he clearly hadn't prepared for. The story that ran that evening was not about a scandal. It was about a fire, a calm response, and a young chef who had rebuilt a menu overnight and then evacuated a crowd without losing a single dish's worth of composure. One outlet ran the headline, "The woman 3 billionaires trust with their money and apparently their hearts," which was somehow both mortifying and, when I read it 3 times at midnight, not actually wrong. The council approved the permits 5 days later. Julian resigned from the Harvest Row account entirely 2 weeks after that, citing what his statement called creative differences, which everyone in the building correctly understood to mean he had lost, publicly, to a 26-year-old he had tried to sideline. I was offered formal, permanent leadership of Harvest Row's culinary operations by a selection panel that included 2 city officials, a labor representative from a local workers' cooperative, and, pointedly, none of the 3 women who had spent the last 2 weeks watching me from a careful, deliberate distance. I interviewed for the position like anyone else. I presented my full operational plan like anyone else. 6 days later, the panel selected me unanimously, and for the first time since the voice memo, I let myself actually believe it had happened because of the work, not despite the mess around it. The romantic problem, unlike the professional one, did not resolve itself with a single hearing or a single headline. For nearly 3 weeks after the fire, all 3 of them kept a distance, so careful it felt almost punishing. Vivian addressed me only as Director Reyes, even in private calls, her voice perfectly professional and completely unreadable. Nadia stopped leaving surprise equipment in my locker and instead scheduled formal engineering consultations through my assistant, like everyone else did. Rosalind sent no more gloved-hand visits after hours, no more quiet requests to taste something that reminded her of home. It was exactly the distance I had asked for in that loading dock, and living inside it for 3 weeks taught me something I hadn't expected. I hated it. On the first official morning in my new office, I found 3 envelopes waiting on my desk, unsigned on the outside, sealed on the inside. I opened them one at a time, standing, because sitting down for this felt like it required more preparation than I had. Vivian's letter was short, controlled, and somehow more honest for its brevity. She wrote that she had spent her whole career mistaking control for safety, and that watching me refuse to let her fix my problems for me had taught her something about respect she hadn't learned from any boardroom. She wrote that if I never chose her, she would still make sure Harvest Row's supply chain never failed me. She signed it with her full name, which felt, from her, like an act of enormous exposure. Nadia's letter was messier, funnier, and somehow the most vulnerable of the 3. She wrote that she had spent years building things because machines didn't reject her, and that the idea of a person choosing not to want her back terrified her more than any failed prototype ever had. She wrote that she was trying to learn the difference between showing someone you care and overwhelming them into a corner, and that she was sorry if she'd done more of the second than the first. She signed it with a small hand-drawn gear, which made me laugh out loud, alone, in an empty office, in a way that turned into something closer to crying before I finished reading. Rosalind's letter was the one that undid me completely. She wrote that she had spent her whole life curating rooms, menus, hotels, and versions of herself so precisely that nothing could ever surprise her, and that the stew I had made her on an overturned crate at 9 at night was the first unscripted thing she had let herself want in longer than she could remember. She wrote that if love required certainty, she would rather have the uncertain, honest version of whatever this was, than the polished, safe version of nothing at all. None of the 3 letters asked me to choose. Each one ended with some version of the same sentence: whatever you decide, that decision belongs to you. I called Danny that night and read her all 3 letters, out loud, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Okay," she finally said. "You're not going to pick one, are you?" "I don't think I want to." "That's not a normal answer, Maya. None of this has been normal since I hit the wrong name in a group chat." Danny laughed, tired and warm. "Then stop apologizing for it and just tell them what you actually want. Correctly, this time. Check the recipients." I opened a new message that night, and for the first time since the accident that started all of this, I chose every name on purpose, slowly, checking each one twice before I let myself hit send. I wrote that I wasn't interested in choosing one of them to make the story simpler for anyone watching from outside it. I wrote that I cared about each of them in a different, specific way that had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with who they actually were when nobody needed them to perform power for an audience. I wrote that if any of them needed exclusivity, they should say so now, honestly, and I would understand and respect whatever they decided. I wrote that if any of them turned this into a competition again, I would walk away from all of it, because I had already spent 1 week almost losing my career to other people's assumptions about what I wanted, and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life doing the same thing in my personal life. Then I told them dinner was Friday, all 4 of us, no assistants, no security unless it was necessary, no purchased restaurants, no algorithms calculating compatibility scores, and no one walking in already convinced she had been chosen over the other 2. Vivian replied within the hour. "Your terms are reasonable. I accept them." Nadia replied next. "Can I bring a gift if it costs less than $20 and doesn't have a chip in it?" I wrote back a single word. "No." Rosalind replied last, an hour after the other 2, in the unhurried way that was entirely hers. "I would like to reserve a table. I will not be purchasing the restaurant. This will require considerable personal restraint." Friday dinner lasted 4 hours, and it started like a negotiation and ended with Nadia stealing food off Vivian's plate, while Vivian pretended to be annoyed, and clearly wasn't, with Rosalind laughing hard enough that her careful posture actually broke for a full 10 seconds, and with me sitting in the middle of it, realizing that power looked completely different, in a room where nobody was allowed to use it against anyone else, including me. There was jealousy, some nights. There still is. Vivian goes quiet when Nadia makes me laugh too easily. Nadia finds excuses to sit closer whenever Rosalind reaches for my hand. Rosalind can communicate an entire warning through the precise way she folds a napkin. But they talk about it now, instead of competing silently through gifts and gestures, and when I say that's enough for tonight, all 3 of them actually stop. 6 months later, Harvest Row runs 4 permanent kitchens across the city, employs 61 people who live in the neighborhoods they serve, and has a waiting list of council districts asking for a 5th. My name is on the operational charter, but the project doesn't belong to me. That was always the point. It belongs to every cook who trained in one of those kitchens, and every family who needed a meal that didn't come with conditions attached. My calendar outside of work stayed complicated, and I stopped apologizing for that too. Monday evenings usually belong to Vivian, who discovered she likes small, unglamorous noodle shops where nobody recognizes her, and nothing on the menu requires a strategy. Wednesdays belong to Nadia, who still builds unnecessary machines, but now asks before installing anything in my apartment, mostly. Saturdays belong to Rosalind, who spent 3 entire days once trying to plan a picnic that could not, under any definition, be classified as luxury hospitality, and mostly succeeded. Some nights belong to all 4 of us. Some nights belong only to me, and all 3 of them have finally learned the difference between wanting my time and owning it. On the 6-month anniversary of the fire, I walked into my office and found a small glass jar on my desk containing exactly 3 ingredients: a single stem of good rice, a small robotic screw shaped like a tiny gift, and 1 dark thread of saffron. The whole thing couldn't have cost more than $20 combined. A card beside it read, "No competition, no assumptions. Dinner tonight?" 3 signatures sat underneath it, unranked, in no particular order. I photographed the jar and sent it to Danny. She wrote back within a minute, "You accidentally proposed to 3 billionaires with a voice memo, nearly lost your job, survived a literal fire, and now you're dating all 3 of them peacefully. I need you to understand how insane that sentence is." I wrote back, "The fire was the easy part." Then I opened the group chat, the same one that had started all of it, checked the names one more time out of habit that would probably never fully leave me, and typed a single word: yes. These days, whenever someone asks me which of the 3 women I accidentally confessed to that night, I tell them the truth, because the truth stopped embarrassing me a long time ago. I didn't send that message to one of them by mistake. I built, slowly and on purpose, a life with all 3 of them, and now, before I send anything that matters, I always check the recipients twice. Not because I'm afraid of the mistake anymore, but because I finally learned what I actually want to say.